Resuming debate, the honourable member for St.Albert, Edmonton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be sharing my time with my good friend, the honourable member for Edmonton Riverbend. Mr. Speaker, it is a true privilege to rise in this House in my maiden speech in response to the government's speech from the throne. At the outset, I would like to thank the tens of thousands of people in the St.Albert Edmonton riding for placing their trust and confidence in me. I can assure them, Mr. Speaker, that I will work every single day to do my very best to represent their interests here in Ottawa. Mr. Speaker, like every other honourable member in this House, I did not get here alone. I got here because of the hundreds and hundreds of people who offered their support and commitment and assistance, not just during the campaign, but over the course of my entire life in helping shape the person who I am today. And while, Mr. Speaker, it is not possible to thank each and every one of those individuals, I do want to pay tribute and thank my family. In particular, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my parents, Tom and Rita Cooper. At an early age, they instilled in me the importance of hard work, the value of education, and the need to be engaged and involved. And indeed, it was they who encouraged me to get involved in the political process at a young age. They saw that I had been quite interested in politics, and they suggested that rather than sitting on the sidelines, that I should roll up my sleeves. They themselves had never been politically active. And so I took their advice, and at the age of 14, I joined the Alberta Provincial Progressive Conservative Party, and I guess I've never really looked back since in terms of my political involvement. Amen. I would also like to acknowledge my brother, Timothy Cooper, who is a medical doctor, presently completing his residency in the area of ear, nose, and throat at the University of Alberta for his lifelong friendship. My paternal grandparents, Michael and Bridget Cooper, who came to Canada from Ireland, and my maternal grandparents, Yosis and Brone Pilipavičius, who fled communism and came to Canada from Lithuania. You know, like so many people from all around the world who come to make Canada home, they didn't have much monetarily. But what they did have was a strong desire to work hard, to contribute to Canadian society, and to build a better life for their families. And for that, I wish to pay tribute to their legacies. I also wish to acknowledge Mary O'Neill, the former MLA for St.Albert, as well as Doug Horner, the former MLA for Spruce Grove St.Albert, who served in a number of cabinet portfolios, including Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance in the Government of Alberta. Both Mary and Doug were people that I first got involved with and supported in their campaigns. Over the years, they've been tremendous political mentors, and I was so very proud that they stood with me both during the nomination and during the election campaign. I'd also like to, Mr. Speaker, acknowledge Dr. Richard Plain, the former mayor of St.Albert, who served ably as my campaign manager during both the nomination and the general election. And last but not least, I would like to acknowledge the partners of the Edmonton law firm Ogilvy LLP for their support and understanding as I tried to balance, on the one hand, a busy civil litigation practice with the demands of seeking elected office. Now, With that, Mr. Speaker, I turn to the substance of my speech, namely responding to the government's speech from the throne. Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne accurately stated that Canadians want to trust their government. Well, if anything is clear in less than 2 months, Mr. Speaker, it's very clear that Canadians can't trust this government. Mr. Speaker, the list of broken promises in less than 2 months is truly breathtaking. Indeed, with each new day seems to come a new Liberal broken promise. One such broken promise was the government's commitment to run a $10 billion deficit in this fiscal year. It now looks like we're looking at about a $1.2 billion shortfall. It may be billions and billions of dollars more to pay for their spending spree. And Mr. Speaker, who's going to pay for this government's spending spree? Well, of course, working Canadians, because after all, Mr. Speaker, there is only one taxpayer, something that this government seems to have already forgotten about it if they knew it in the first place. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, for working Canadians, living in Canada is going to become a much more expensive place to live thanks to this Liberal government. How is it going to be more expensive, you ask? Well, Mr. Speaker, this government wants to impose a carbon tax. It wants to hike payroll taxes. It wants to eliminate income splitting for single-income families. It wants to eliminate the universal child care benefit, and it wants to roll back TFSAs. Mr. Speaker, it's very, very clear that this government has no plan and no vision other than job-killing, tax and spend redistributive schemes. This is evidenced by the fact that there was no mention of the speech from the throne about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the biggest trade deal in Canadian history, which is going to allow Canadian businesses to get their products to market to 800 million consumers duty-free. But this government didn't even bother to mention it. No mention of Alberta's vital energy sector. No mention about any meaningful strategy to create jobs, to get the economy growing, and to get Canadians back to work.
There is no plan, Michael.
And when it comes to keeping Canadians safe, Mr. Speaker, this government has been equally short-sighted. The greatest security threat to Canada comes from ISIS. ISIS is responsible for slaughtering tens of thousands of people in Iraq, in Syria, and around the world. Entire villages have been upended, and literally rivers of blood flow in Iraq and Syria, and yet this government's response is to cut and run by pulling out of the CF-18s. And yet the Minister of National Defense, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister can't explain how that's going to assist the international coalition to defeat ISIS, and the reason is because it's completely unhelpful. So I say to the honourable members opposite in closing that in terms of a road to prosperity, it doesn't come by spending more, by regulating more, by taxing more, and by redistributing more. It comes from being fiscally responsible and trusting taxpayers and creating the conditions for growth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.